Well, hello, and welcome to my situtory. My name's Jane. I'm a textile artist based in the heart of Scotland, and every Friday I come on here and I talk about creativity, nature, or living life a little bit differently. And this week I'm going to be talking about living life a little bit differently. But first, here we are in Scotland, and it is another beautifully glorious sunny day. And the garden is full of tulips and narcissi. I've got bunches of them here. There's more on my table. And I thought that what I'll do, because it's really useful, I find, to see things growing so I can make a note of what bulbs I want to buy in the autumn. I'll just show you what is blooming here this week and put the names next to it. But I'll do that right at the end, because first of all, I want to talk about sustainability and clothes. And the reason that this has been playing on my mind a lot is that in the Studio Club, which is my kind of online creativity community that I run, we have been talking about clothes. And all of the 6 months, we're doing a kind of a project that is connecting our ancestors, particularly grandparents and parents, through textiles, clothes, things they made, the kind of fashions of the day to ourselves. And we've been learning skills and embroidery and so on, and then thinking about our own place in this with textiles and clothes and fashion and skills, and also how we can hand that on to the younger generation, to children and grandchildren and all of that. So this particular section, and if you're wanting to join in with this and you aren't a studio clubber, I'll put the details underneath here. You're really welcome. And there isn't a particular join point. So if you're wanting to join and talk about the kind of things that we're talking about in this video, but also learn how to die with food waste, we have a book club. We're going to be talking to a woman who has started a business eco-printing secondhand clothes. All of these kinds of things fit into this section. So if you want to know more about it, you can look in the description. But anyway, we have been talking about really clothes and how many clothes people have, and kind of, it's a really interesting, nuanced kind of conversation. And it's been really refreshing, because what I often find is that as soon as people talk about sort of eco things online, there's so much judgment, so much smuggery, so much guilt, and these things kind of build up walls. Whereas I feel that in conversations, we should be really looking for finding out as much as we can, and looking for solutions, and looking back to history and seeing what worked and what didn't work, and all of these kinds of things, and having a much more open conversation rather than something that is, just judgy. Because the thing is that we all know that we are manufacturing and consuming or sending to landfill too many clothes. I mean, way too many clothes. But it's still happening. So, just knowing that there is a problem here is not causing a solution. And I feel that it's a really, because so much of it's psychological and kind of the way that we relate to clothes. I feel that, it can't just be something that is solved by writing things which say, oh, this is wrong, you must stop. So in the Studio Club, we've been looking backwards. So we've been looking backwards to the rationing of clothes, which happened in the Second World War in the UK and also in the US. We've been focusing really on the UK. And what happened here was that rationing of clothes was brought in 1941. And the reason was that they wanted to free up factory space and also clothes, like fabric manufacturing space, and kind of like the actual making of the clothes factory space. They wanted to free those up so that they could make all of the uniforms that were being needed. And that meant that domestic clothes production had to be reduced. So brought in rationing. And to start with, you got a book of 60 coupons, which would do you the year. And this was based on the idea that this would get you one full outfit. So like overcoat, dress, tights, socks, shoes, all of these kinds of things, one a year. And that was based on research which had been ongoing the previous years anyway, about how many clothes did people buy. And buying that amount of clothes in a year was kind of typical of sort of lower middle class kind of thing. So somewhere in the middle of the income bracket. So some people, when they got their coupons, that was pretty much what they would have been buying anyway. Some people, it was much less than they had been buying. And for a large amount of the population, there is no way that they would have had that money available to spend all of their coupons. So very quickly, there was a black market in clothes coupons, and the government tried to stamp down on it by saying that to buy clothes, you had to turn up with your book and proof of identity. And then over the war, and particularly the years after it, because rationing didn't stop with the war, it went on till the early 1950s, the number of coupons that you got reduced. And also the amount of clothing that was even available reduced, and the price of clothing went up. So we've been looking at this, and we've been looking at lots of things like sewing magazines that were published in the mid-1940s, and the kind of adverts that were there that were kind of related to rationing, about, buying embroidery wools and linens, and about kind of like very, very hilariously smug adverts showing beautifully dressed women who were wearing dresses made of furnishing fabrics, basically saying, this, don't you wish that you had also bought lots of furnishing fabrics before rationing came in, because now you would be beautifully dressed in floral linen union. So we've been looking at all of that, and also things like the size of wardrobes, because the size of a wardrobe determines how many clothes you can put in it. And I think that the size of the wardrobe suggests the kind of normal amount of clothes for a person each year. So in 1930s, 1920s, most wardrobes were really, really small. They were like this and then this. And people did not have that many outfits. There's a really good book by Charlie Porter about the sort of Bloomsbury set and their clothes. I'll put the title here. And that he went and he measured the wardrobes and worked out how many outfits people could have. It's a fascinating book, actually. Really recommend it. So, but then today, where we have fitted wardrobes or dressing rooms, which I have a cupboard that is a dressing room, that kind of almost invites having more and more clothes. So we've been looking at that, and then I was thinking about my own kind of teenage years, 20s, and I went to university in 1987, must have been, and at that time fashion, like high fashion, was just like a fancy dress box. It was taking influences from everywhere, you know, geographically, historically. Now I look back and I kind of shudder with the cultural appropriation of it all, because nobody thought, you know, is that religious? Is it cultural? Nothing, you know, just stuff it all together, send it down a catwalk. And that's what really influenced me. So Yves Saint Laurent is amazing. You know, there was a Russian collection, there was a Japanese collection, there was, you know, it was joyful, it was playful, and it was just a mishmash of everything. And I really took that on board as a teenager. And I had no money, obviously, but I could sew. And also, late 1980s in Aberdeen, where I went to university, was a wonderful place for jumble sales. And I shared a flat with a young woman called Corinne, and we both loved clothes. And we both had no money. So we would go to these jumble sales and we would buy bin bags of things. And we would take them back along Union Street to our flat, and we'd start cutting them up and putting them together and creating fancy dressy kind of outfits from them. I don't know whether you've seen the film Pretty in Pink, but that was really, really influential on me, because the plot of it is that here is this teenage girl in America. She can't afford to buy a prom dress from the fancy prom dress shop. So her dad goes to the thrift shop and he buys 2 or 3 really hideous evening dresses, maybe bridesmaid dresses, I don't know. And she then cuts them up and sews them together to become something that is so much nicer than anything in the fancy prom dress shop. And that's kind of, I think, what Corinne and I were going for. But what I would say is it was really, really high consumption. You couldn't get into our rooms for clothes, either fully made or part made. You know, we would pull things to bits that we'd made and remake them, and it was massive, massive consumption. Now, I can say, oh well, it wasn't fast fashion because it wasn't new, and I could be smug, but I don't think that that is the issue. The issue was I was drawn to have all of this massive possibility and playfulness and just joy in the innovation of clothing myself. And I think that that is a massive driver for things. It wasn't about status, you know. I mean, I expect that everybody else thought we looked a bit weird. You know, I went up to university with 12 hats, and I probably acquired more at the jumble sales. And I'd wear a hat every day, you know. Sometimes they would be little black pillboxes with veils, and sometimes they would be big cloche hats. And, you know, we stood out, shall I say. But it was hyper, hyper, hyper consumption. And then this weekend, you know, my daughters were home for Easter, so I was chatting to them, and they live in London. They are in their early 20s, and they are much, much, much more constrained in how much they buy. Now, when they were teenagers living here, and they had a clothing allowance from us because I could not put up with that can I have. So from age 13 they had clothing allowances, and they had to buy everything with the school uniform, shoes, knickers, everything. And those years while they were here, sort of like 13 to 18, there was a lot of fast fashion going on. because they wanted things, they didn't have much money, they would rather have lots of things. And that was completely up to them. You know, you can't give somebody a clothing allowance and then get sniffy about where they're buying their clothes. So we went through the fast fashion stage. But now, living in London in small spaces with not much wardrobe space, and I think this is really quite key, they are much more curated in their buying than I've ever been. And they buy a lot of vintage. My older daughter, she's like a detective buying, well, she calls it vintage. Lots of it's 1990s, which I cannot believe is meant to be vintage. But she will be looking for particular designs, particular brands. She likes sort of embroidered sweatshirts from the 1990s, and she will get them either online, like Vinted or Depop, where she's got all of these searches and so on, or in high-end vintage shops in Camden. And she mixes them with new stuff, which again, she'll have done a lot of research about. It's got to be that particular trouser shape or whatever it is. And she is incredibly curated. But she wouldn't ever alter anything or make anything. Her creativity goes into putting together really cool outfits from these things that she has bought, a bit like a stylist, I suppose. My younger daughter is much more of a maker, and the thing that drove her to making things is that she's about the same height as me, so I'm 5'3", so quite short, and she's got quite a curvy figure. So what she was finding is that if she bought jeans, trousers of any sort that fitted her on the hips, her waist is so small that if she sat down, people could see down the back of the jeans and see her knickers, which nobody wants. So it was to try and get these things to fit better that she started kind of learning sewing skills so she could alter them. So she could take up the leg on jeans, and she could take in the waistband at the back so that nobody was seeing her knickers. And that kind of, it gave her a feeling of accomplishment. And then autumn last year, maybe, she took up knitting. She knit lots of presents for friends. She knit lots of balaclavas for friends. And she suddenly found that making things which were really fashionable. So at the moment she's knitting an off-the-shoulder summer top that kind of like has a scarf going around it. And particularly learning to draft patterns, because this summer top, she is copying a photograph, but she's working out all of the gauges and that kind of thing, which is something that I don't tend to do, you know. She's learning all of it from YouTube. It gives her a sense of accomplishment, and she just loves that feeling when somebody says, oh, I love that outfit. She can go, ha, I made it for myself. So I think that they both have much, much more sensible relationships with clothes than I did at their age, or probably have now. And I think that a lot of that is to do with wardrobe size. But I asked them about their friends. And Katie said that when she started altering her clothes and so on, she got a lot of friends saying, could she do that for them? Because realistically, lots of ready-made clothes are made for body shapes which are nobody's body shape really, and they never quite fit. So there was lots of friends came and said, could you do that? And she said, I'll show you how to do it, but I won't do it for you, I don't have time. And said, oh, but pay you. I said, you know, if you want to pay somebody, go to, you know, the alteration shop on the high street and pay them. They actually will be able to do it more professionally and so on. So I found it really interesting that there is this cachet to being able to do things. There's a cachet in the home, sort of like handmade thing, because she'd knitted a couple of her friends these balaclavas, and it's like silk lined balaclavas. And then suddenly everybody wanted one, and she had to say, look, as I'm sure all makers here are sort of like, you know, no offense, but these were for, you know, really, really special friends. I can't spend my entire life knitting balaclavas. So there is this cachet, and there's lots of people have gone to, you know, visible darning workshops in Camden and posted on their Instagram and things. But there seems to be less evidence that they are bringing it actually into their lives. So I find that really interesting, that we have something that is trendy. And I did see there was somebody writing about how one of the fast fashion shops was just full of things that looked as though they had been upcycled, but had just been made to look upcycled, like waistcoats and tops made from jeans pockets and so on. So the trend is there, but is it actually coming down to equipping people with skills and that kind of thing? So I think it is just a fascinating topic. How do we get people to value their clothes more? Because I am terrible. You know, I haven't bought anything new for a couple of years, but I had to take Vinted off my phone because I would feel that if I was bored or sitting, you know, waiting for an appointment or whatever, it felt as though shopping was an activity that I could do. And I ended up with far too many clothes, and I had to kind of like deactivate my account. And, you know, that's no better than, well, I mean, it's got less impact on the environment, arguably, but it's no better in terms of my relationship with consuming things. So I think that it is a fascinating and multi-layered thing. And I do wonder whether restricting wardrobes would be the answer to these things. You can only actually have, you know, a clothes rail to put all your clothes on. I don't know. Anyway, I would love to have your take in the comments underneath here, because I think that it's only by discussing these things without judgment, without guilt, without people being smug about capsule collections or whatever, or people who have a lot of money going on about, you know, the things that they bought from XYZ fair trade thing. And it's, you know, it's a difficult thing. And I think there has to be an open discussion, and really look at why do we want to buy so many clothes, you know? And do we need to address those things, the things that are the, oh, I need that, I need that, I need that, but also without taking the playfulness and joy out of dressing. So that's where I'm going to end it. And I'm just going to show you some tulips now. Tulips, I love tulips. And in some ways, I do think that for me, the tulips are the fast fashion of the bulb place, because with the exception of a dozen tulips that I have around here, most of the tulips that I plant are an annual crop. And they don't like our heavy soil, they don't like the wetness, and they tend not to reappear next year. So I know that the tulips that I plant are not going to do more than 1 year, which makes them not great from a sustainability point of view. And I did have a couple of years where I didn't grow tulips, and I missed them. I missed them so much. So this year I have them back, but I am going to be pulling all of the bulbs and they're going to go to my parents' garden, which is sand, where they will actually rebloom. So they'll be reblooming in East Lothian. But tulips were the mainstay of this time of year when I was a flower farmer, because here in the garden, it's really late May that I have any other flowers in bulk. So the tulips were the things that I could take to those early farmers markets and get people used to buying flowers from me. So although I didn't ever make much money on them, they were the start of the season, and with my bright green van and all of these multicolored tulips, it was just eye-catching and marketing, and it was wonderful. Yeah, they were also, tulips were my biggest flower farming disaster, where deer came up from the woods one night and ate 4,000 tulip bulbs. It was quite cold weather, and at that time we didn't have the kind of the planting between us and them, and they were hungry and they came up and they ate in one single night 4,000 tulip bulbs, which was half my crop, and I cried. So highs and lows, tulips, and I'm going to leave it there, and I shall see you next Friday for a rambly chat, no doubt, about something else. But please do leave a comment about tulips or about fast fashion and size of wardrobes. And bye-bye.